Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guest today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back into some more bite-sized business advice. Today's episode is for those people who find themselves stuck maybe a little bit in business. I think we all get there at some point. We've hit a plateau and we want to go to the next level. We see all these companies growing at hyper speed, but then there's the flip side of dying at hyper speed. And we want to avoid possibly both of those on this episode. But we're going to talk and get in very interesting perspective on growing your company from the perspective of growing startups. And I have a very special guest here with me to do that, Vijay Rajendran. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brandon. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited about this. So you bring, it's in your name. If you're watching here, you could see it on the screen. If you're listening, Startup System is on the screen next to Vijay's name. So you have a very unique approach and a unique background of dealing with and growing your own startups. We're talking to business owners who are established. They've been in business a long time. They haven't experienced that hyper growth, but they're also not out of business like a lot of startups tend to be. So how do you see your model fitting onto people who have been in business for a while and just want to get to the next level?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. And for background, I had a couple different startups, one in e-commerce, one in fintech. I was leading venture design in a venture studio where we would incubate new companies from scratch with experienced entrepreneurs, and then spent 5 years in venture capital with 500 global, also known as 500 startups. And at that point that I left, I was managing portfolio value for a large portfolio of 2,800 investments, which included companies that were very new and pre-seed, all the way to companies that were exiting and were public and certainly unicorns. So given that experience, I've seen what it's like, as you said, to start things and see them go to zero or to the moon. And for a lot of people, that isn't necessarily the right set of outcomes. But what I've learned is there is a system by which you have to do things, implement them, create the right conditions for your business to grow. And the difference with the startups and other businesses, and the vast majority of businesses are not startups, the difference is that it's just the time frame that's different. So when you have a startup, every 24 to 36 months, you are trying to raise more capital. And oftentimes, less than that if you're in a very cash hungry type of business or business model. And what that means is there's this system of launch, fundraise, and then figure out go to market, and subsequently create a team and do team building. After that, go about creating metrics, KPIs, OKRs, whatever systems you need to measure in order to iterate and change and scale. And you do that every 18 to 24 months. You start that process over again because you're raising more money, you're on this hamster wheel where you're trying to go from pre-seed to C to Series A to B. And I work with a Series E company at the moment right now as an executive coach. And that is a lot of stress on founders' lives. And they're basically playing a new and more complex and difficult level of a video game every 18 to 24 months. So what are the lessons that we can take out of there? There are many, and certainly it has to do with this knowledge that I need to change and do these things because allowing them unlocks more growth.
I love that. And it's the video game analogy, I think is really clear for a lot of people. I can remember when I was a kid, whether it was Super Mario Bros. Or you could tell I didn't play a lot of video games, right? Whatever the level was where you had to get to the next one,
Of course.
the first couple levels, you can get there. Just like you open the box, you put the game in, and you do it. As you go further and further, you start to die or fail or whatever, and you have to practice that level over and over and over, and it takes longer and longer to up level. That's an interesting analogy because in business, you can't die. I mean, if you die, you're out of business. But how do you see that overlap between startups who are going through this evolution and also the small business owners and entrepreneurs listening to this? I mean, you said we have to up level. So how do you effectively do that without quote unquote dying in the video game?
So what I have observed, and again, startups are just like doing so much in a compressed time, is that you go from being someone who had a curiosity about a problem they wanted to solve. They built a product. And so you were the creator of a thing. You go from being creator of a thing to one day being the founder of a startup, which is now this is a business. And we're trying to sell that thing and get from post product to post revenue. And now you go from that to, managing dozens of people, going from 10 to 100,000 to $1 million in revenue, and you're the CEO of a startup. And that is a big jump because there, in terms of the communication, the architecture of your company, in terms of the organization and how much bigger it's getting, and then subsequently go from being CEO, founder of a startup to CEO of a company, and then eventually a leader and sometimes a publicly facing leader, which you never had to do before, of a large and growing enterprise. And so you have these like evolutions, and everyone has to up level, and nothing prepares you. There's lots of management books out there about leadership. It turns out, whether you've read any of the books that you would find in like an airport bookstore, like they won't like turn you into that CEO. You have to adopt new behaviors. You have to take action, and you have to try new things and unlock your own genius, and figure out with the things that are in your zone of genius and how to bring that out, and then bring out the genius of others around you. Then you can accomplish great things, and then that's how people succeed. And so what I observe about people who are up leveling is they are very aware of their strengths. They are very aware of their weaknesses. They had to at one point be the chief everything officer, but then they went to a place where eventually they knew what the CEO had to do. The CEO has like 3 jobs. The first one is make sure the business is funded, so don't run out of money. The second thing is set strategy. And the third thing is set culture and North Star for the organization. So everything else is really someone else's specialization. And you have responsibility for it because you're the chief executive, but there are these 3 indispensable jobs that I think, if we are running a smaller enterprise, let's say a 7-figure business, then we don't have the luxury of just focusing on these 3 things. We have to be the chief everything officer. But understanding how am I using new tools, technology, services to get time back to do the things that only I can do, and how can I be thinking about my own productivity and juggling with joy, as I like to call it, the many responsibilities and burdens of a small business owner. Like then, those are principles that we can start to adopt, and we don't have the luxury of necessarily doing like all of them, but that mindset allows people to up level faster than they would otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting. You didn't say anything about writing invoices and sending them to customers, and then following up on your sales calls as a CEO. All the things that small business owners are accustomed to doing.
Yeah.
And no, you also did not say you can drop them immediately. Like there's an evolution. We all understand that, but I think from what I'm curious to hear is from your perspective with the framework of the startup system, going from wherever you are now in business to be actually the CEO, or ultimately when we work with people, our clients, I want them to go beyond CEO and actually be the chairman of the board. I think it's way more, there's a way more freedom and flexibility. And that's really why you started your business.
Mhm.
But you have to go to CEO first because somebody's got to do that role.
Yeah.
So how do we get people from where they are to actually being a CEO without the venture capital? I mean, that's
Yeah.
the piece, right? The funding piece. We don't have that aggressive influx of capital. So how do we get there?
So behind this is the idea of how do I spend more of my time working on the business than in the business? And you can't drop things at the same time you can't do everything. And so the best thing I find is to be thoughtful about how you're allocating your energy, knowing a lot about yourself and when you're at your best and when you're not, and then how to structure the things that you have to do around those times is much more valuable than figuring out how do I squeeze an extra 15, 30 minutes, like whatever, out of my day. So I'd say that is like the one like very tactical thing that I've seen people do effectively, is to increase the quality of the time they're working and the energy that they're bringing to it. The other part about getting to CEO means there means different things to different people. So for some people, it means identifying these are the things I'm not good at, and I need to like hire somebody to do them for me. But it turns out that you can't hire them until you figured out enough of that role to be able to manage the person in it, which is like which I would say is the number one takeaway from Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel's like legendary book, High Output Management. Like you want a like really dense book about like how to be a world-class manager. Like that's like a top book. And like that's the thing he said, which is very different from like what you might hear in the world of, oh, just like pick people who are like really good and trust them to just like do it, which is like some quote that I think is attributed to Steve Jobs that is like often part of the stuff you see on LinkedIn. You actually need to know enough in order to hold people accountable and to like set their results and metrics and goals, which is actually what people want as opposed to ambiguity. So there's one thing, is like create opportunities for others to help you and work around you. And the other thing is, in order to be the CEO and work on the business, is ask yourself what you're saying no to. So having a do not do list is more important than having a to-do list. And I actually don't have a to-do list. I just have a calendar. Like if it's not on the calendar, then it shouldn't be done. And so that I think are some of the very tactical ways you take that sort of abstract idea of becoming the CEO, and instead saying, I'm going instead of the chief everything officer, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the chief like mostly everything officer, and then go down that path to being like a real chief executive.
Yeah, it's mostly everything, some things, a few things. It's a path, right? It's a scale. I think that framework, that type of thinking would solve a lot of people's problems in terms of business growth and also getting their time freedom back too. But the other side of that question is, unfortunately, in the startup world, there's a lot of them that don't work out, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot that just they close it, they call it quits, whatever that may be. For people who are existing in business, they're running their business, they're making money, they have revenue, profit, all these things, but it's not growing. There is no path to growth. how do you, not in that context, but in the startup world, like how do you evaluate when it's time to call it quits?
So there is like the sometimes sheer level of like motivation of the founding team. Like they may have poured their heart and soul into this, and then they're like, this is a business that cannot support the cost structure we have. We cannot pay for our team in particular. Whatever it is, like we have to stop what we're doing and shut down. Separately, there can be opportunities where it's like, hey, we built something. It's a valuable online property or software product, and you have new opportunities to sell that business to someone who wants to just like have something that's generating seven figures with like and with some cash flow or break even possibilities, because they see something that maybe is worth tackling. And those are sort of like the types of business you might see on an acquire.com or something else, right? So it's the team doesn't want to, so there's lack of motivation, there's possibility of selling. And the third option is you've built something that is growing a little bit or is kind of flat. And those are what VCs in their portfolios call zombie companies, because they won't die, but they're not necessarily flourishing in the terms that those institutional investors want to see, which is these companies go on to be worth $1 billion or and have a liquidity event. So what happens in those situations is people will say, hey, can I buy out the investors or and get them off the cap table, and then maybe they do a management buyout to like some people I've seen in some people in the company, and it might be that one founder or one senior executive says, yeah, I'm happy to like run this business and be an owner and all of that, and that's what I want. And another person on that founding team could often say, I want another swing at bat here. I see new opportunities in a different space, or I'll take a break and then think about what the next business will be, or go back to corporate life, whatever it is that is like motivating them. And I think that's okay too. Is for people to think about who wants to play on this team now, and then who has like other aspirations. Having that conversation is very, very hard, and people fight more than they have that conversation. And I highly recommend having a facilitated discussion between co-founders, and I've been able to help with that before, because that's where people are able to talk about the things that don't happen between all their different meetings and their different work streams.
Yeah, I can only imagine how hard that is, because it's not even just the founder, co-founder, investors. Like you've employed people at that point, and you're talking about potentially laying people off, maybe unexpectedly. And it's a big decision. If you're in that position, again, not in the startup world, but business owners, entrepreneurs, 6-7 figure business, what are some of the things that you could do before you have to get to that conversation where you could potentially revive a zombie company? Like, based on everything you've seen in the startup world, are there things outside of the venture capital and investment that would inject some life back into that company?
Yeah. VC doesn't inject life in a company. It provides rocket fuel for rockets. So the company has already pivoted and shown traction that gets the VC, not the other way around, which is often a misnomer outside of tech and the Valley. I would say the answer to your question, which is, what do you do when things have stalled, right? Is you have a few levers you can pull, right? So there's a change of leadership, which might include you. There is a change of the market, because you might be going after a product in a market that maybe but actually, people, they're just not open to change. And you need to like change your go-to-market motion or something like that. 3, there's some part of your team that it needs to have a significant upgrade. And so you may actually shrink the team, but have 10x players who are just as productive. 3, you may say, I'm actually okay to run this business, but I just need to be like a little more profitable, in which case you take an axe to the cost structure and you make some of those difficult choices you alluded to, which can include automation, moving things offshore, asking what are we really good at? Oh, we're really good at like sales, or we're good at customer success, or some aspect of that. Maybe we don't need to do our own development. Maybe that is something we outsource to something else, or or someone else who can do that. So I think there are many more levers in that final category, given the ability for us to do things with Gen AI and different types of like offshore and outsourced relationships that allow the business to continue. Again, assuming you want the business to continue and you're not just saying like, I poured my heart and soul in this, I've had a good run, I'm ready to hand it off. I shut down my first startup because it was growing a little bit, and it was not going to get to venture scale, and and I had like an offer to sell it, but it was going to come with terms of how I needed to work that just wasn't a fit. And so having a really difficult conversation, and then still you're going to like come to the most rational answer and not feel good about it, like going through the process of what you have to do next. So that having experience of that, having like worked with people who have experienced that, those are the levers you can pull, and you just need the clarity to follow through, even if it doesn't feel good.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And those are all real conversations and real things to look at. The reason I ask that is because people usually want to grow their business. Wherever they are, they're like, I want to grow my business. And a lot of times it's been flat for 5, 10 years plus. And that's the time to ask those questions before you go and invest more, before you go and I don't know, maybe even shut it down. Like, think about why you want to grow it, and what are those levers you could pull, and are they worth pulling? So I think from the startup perspective, it's really, really interesting to see how quick they grow, but also pull the plug. And that's why I think this conversation is very interesting for small business owners.
Exactly. And for some people, they know that the current situation is temporary. Like maybe it was during COVID or something like that. And so they went into so-called cockroach mode, where they just needed to survive. Yeah. And for others, they realize, something substantial has shifted, and we just need to make a hard pivot, and we need to be a completely different kind of business. And there are others who have thought about and written about pivots who are much smarter than me. Mike Maples has a new book about that. But your ability to accelerate your rate of learning is really important at the early stage, and it shouldn't go away. Like, you should continue to think about what is the smartest iteration for us to grab the most revenue for the customer with the greatest willingness to pay, even if that like someone doesn't like that, and then doesn't feel like that's their that was the original purpose of the business. Having the ability to adapt and the openness to evolve is very important.
Yeah, really cool conversation. I appreciate it. Where can the listeners find out more about you?
So I am at mystartupsystem.com. They can find out more about the work I do and those dimensions of the startup system. Again, I'm an executive coach to founders and investors and executives, and I'm pretty accessible on LinkedIn as well. And you can also just write to me at vijay@mystartupsystem.com.
I love it. This is awesome. So I love to end these episodes with a question. And what if we believe that powerful questions get powerful answers? And in the context of this conversation, we're talking about going from where you are to growth, hopefully, and staying in business, or potentially finding something else, finding a different path. Yeah. But with that said, what is the powerful question you want the listener to ask themselves so that they can maybe find the answer of what's next for their company?
I ask a lot of questions as an executive coach, and usually it's putting a mirror up to people, and I think there's the biggest question is, what is it that brings you the greatest energy? Because I think that is an unlock question to where people will be able to tap into the things that allow them to live for their purpose, that allow them to generate the wealth they want, to have a thriving business, because if the business isn't thriving, they're not, to draw on that energy to ultimately also find their freedom, which is why so many of us are entrepreneurs.
I love it. That's a good question to ask too. So wherever you're watching, listening, ask yourself that question. See what comes up as the answer. Vijay, I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, Brandon. Thanks so much. This has been a real treat.
For wherever you're watching, listening, also make sure you subscribe. Everything Vijay just said to go do and connect with him is down in the show notes down below. But subscribe. We want to make sure you're back on tomorrow's episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Let's help you grow your business even more. We'll see.